The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the asphalt of the Rusty Iron Tavern parking lot into a black mirror, reflecting 1,000 chrome exhausts and leather cuts. The thunder wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from 1,200 Harley-Davidson engines, their collective rumble shaking windows 3 blocks away in downtown Ridgemont, Arizona. Margaret Brennan stood behind her son, rain dripping from the brim of an oversized leather jacket that hung on her small frame like a borrowed coat. At 68 years old, she looked out of place among the sea of tattooed bikers, their cuts displaying patches from 15 different Hell Angels chapters across the American West. Her gray hair, pulled back in a tight bun, was plastered to her skull. Her hands, scarred from 40 years of restaurant work, gripped the edge of a wooden platform someone's flatbed truck pressed into service as a makeshift stage. Her son, Colt, stood in front of her, 6'3", of muscle and ink and authority, his voice cutting through the rain and the rumble. "Tonight we show them." That's when Maggie saw it, a red dot, thin as a laser pointer, dancing on her son's chest. For a split second, the world stopped. The rain froze mid-fall. The engines went silent, and Margaret Brennan wasn't a 68-year-old diner owner anymore. She was 34 again, standing on a Marine base in Southern California, watching her husband Declan pack his duffel for the Gulf. She remembered his hands, patient and deliberate, as he taught her to recognize threats. Laser sights, sniper positions, the kind of knowledge military wives learned when their husbands deployed to war zones. "If you ever see a red dot," Declan had said, his voice gentle but firm, "you move first, think later." Maggie didn't think. "Watch out, son." She lunged forward, her hands still strong despite decades of arthritis and hard work connected with her son's leather-clad back. She pushed. Hard. Colt stumbled sideways, caught off guard by his mother's sudden strength. The crack of the rifle shot split the air. The bullet, a 308 round fired from 200 yards away, tore through the space where Colt's chest had been a fraction of a second earlier. It found flesh, but not his. The impact spun Maggie halfway around. Her left shoulder exploded in white-hot pain as the round punched through muscle and shattered against her scapula. Blood sprayed across Colt's face. She felt her legs give out, felt herself falling. Then Colt's arms were around her, catching her before she hit the wet asphalt. "No, no, 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 no!" His voice, raw, broken. The sound a man makes when his world ends. The parking lot erupted into chaos. 1,200 bikers moved as one organism. Rifles materialized from under cuts and from saddlebags. The night lit up with muzzle flashes as a return fire streaked toward the rooftop where the sniper had taken his shot. Men shouted, boots pounded pavement. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began their wail. But Maggie heard none of it. She was floating now, her vision tunneling. She could see Colt's face above her, rain mixing with tears, his mouth moving, but the words coming from very far away. She wanted to tell him it was okay, that she wasn't scared, that this was what mothers did, but her mouth wouldn't work. Her lungs felt like they were filled with concrete. Blood pooled beneath her, mixing with rainwater, flowing in rivulets toward the storm drain. "Stay with me," Colt was saying, his hands pressed against her shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me, Ma. Don't you dare. Don't you dare leave me." Maggie managed a smile, or thought she did. Her lips felt numb. "You okay?" she whispered, and then the world went black. 1 week earlier, the Sunday morning sun cut through the windows of Brennan's Route 66 diner at exactly 7 o'clock, painting golden stripes across the worn linoleum floor. The place smelled like it always did: coffee, bacon, grease, and something indefinable that could only be described as home. Maggie stood behind the counter, her hands moving with the muscle memory of 4 decades. Pour coffee, flip eggs, plate the hash browns just so, with a little pool for the ketchup. She'd performed these movements so many times they'd worn grooves in her soul. The diner was small, 20 seats at the counter, 8 booths along the windows. The walls were decorated with photographs spanning 40 years, the grand opening in 1984, young Maggie and her husband Declan cutting a ribbon. Declan in his army uniform, the green beret of a Gulf War veteran. Baby Colt, then toddler Colt, then teenage Colt, standing beside his first motorcycle. And there behind the cash register, the photo that mattered most. Declan in desert camouflage tan and lean and young, his arm around a pregnant Maggie. The back of the photograph, visible when you picked it up, bore her handwriting. "December, remember your promise. Come home to us." He had come home. Broken, but home. The bell above the door chimed. Maggie didn't need to look up to know who it was. The rumble of the motorcycle engine, the particular weight of the boots on the threshold, she'd know her son anywhere. "Morning, Ma." Colt Brennan filled the doorway the way he filled every space he entered with presence. At 42, he was the spitting image of his father if Declan had lived long enough to grow into middle age. Same broad shoulders, same intense blue eyes, same way of standing with his weight slightly forward, always ready to move. But where Declan had been a soldier, Colt was something else entirely. The leather cut he wore told the story. Hell Angels Motorcycle Club, Ridgemont chapter, and on the front, over his heart, the simple patch that carried more weight than any military medal president. "Sit down before you fall down," Maggie said, without looking up from the eggs she was scrambling. "You look like hell." Rebuilt a 76 shovel head till 4 in the morning. Colt slid onto his usual stool at the counter. Transmission was completely shot. Had to fabricate new gears from scratch. Your father would have taken 3 days on a job like that. I'm faster than he was. You're more reckless than he was. Maggie slid a plate in front of him. 3 eggs over easy, hash browns with onions. Bacon so crisp it would shatter if you looked at it wrong. The way he'd eaten it since he was 5 years old. Colt picked up his fork, but his eyes were on his mother, watching. The way children watch their parents when they're worried but don't want to show it. "Your hands are shaking, Ma." "Getting old." "You're not old. You're 68. That's old, baby." "Not for you." He set down his fork. "What's wrong?" Maggie turned away, busying herself with the coffee pot. "Nothing's wrong, just tired." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But before Colt could press, the door chimed again. A group of bikers filed in, members of Colt's chapter, their cuts marking them as brothers. They greeted Maggie with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty. "Morning, Ma." "Morning, Mrs. B." "You're looking beautiful today, Margaret." She waved them off with a dish towel, but there was warmth in her eyes. These men, these rough, tattooed, dangerous-looking men, they were gentle with her. Respectful. They called her Ma or Mrs. B, and they meant it. She'd fed them. Listened to their problems. Never judged. Never asked questions they didn't want to answer. To them, she wasn't just Colt's mother. She was chapter mom. And in the world of motorcycle clubs, that meant something. Colt watched the interaction, his face unreadable. Then he leaned across the counter, lowering his voice. "Ma, I'm coming by tomorrow, and we're talking. For real." "Nothing to talk about, honey. There's always something to talk about when you lie to me." He stood, dropped a 20 on the counter, far more than the meal cost, and headed for the door. The other bikers followed, their boots heavy on the floor. When they were gone, Maggie stood alone in the empty diner. She reached under the counter and pulled out a manila envelope. The return address made her stomach clench. Caldwell Development Group. She didn't open it. She already knew what it said. She'd received 3 others just like it over the past 2 weeks. Instead, she walked to the old cast-iron stove in the corner, the one Declan had salvaged from a demolition site in 1984 and restored with his own hands. She opened the firebox, and she fed the envelope to the flames. The paper curled and blackened, Caldwell's carefully worded threats turning to ash. But Maggie knew fire couldn't make problems disappear. It could only postpone them. She looked at the photograph of Declan again. His eyes seemed to follow her the way they always had. Even in a static image, even 20 years after it was taken, she could feel his presence. "What would you do, Dec?" she whispered. But she already knew the answer. Declan would stand, would fight, would never surrender to bullies no matter how much money they had or how much power they wielded. The question wasn't what Declan would do. It was whether Maggie had the strength to do it herself. Monday morning arrived with the kind of brightness that felt almost aggressive. Maggie opened the diner at 6, same as always. By 6:30, she had her first customer, old Timothy Walker, who'd been eating breakfast at her counter since Reagan was president. "Coffee, Tim." "Please, Maggie." Black like always. She poured her hand steadier this morning. Sunday had been difficult, keeping secrets from Colt. But she'd made her decision. She would handle this herself. Legally, properly, the way Declan would have wanted. At 7 exactly, the city inspector arrived. Raymond Kowalski was a thin man with a thin mustache, and the kind of face that looked apologetic even when it wasn't. He wore a clip-on tie and carried a clipboard, and when he walked through the door, Maggie knew exactly why he was there. Timothy looked up from his eggs, frowned, then returned to his meal. He'd seen enough in his 78 years to recognize trouble when it walked in wearing a cheap suit. "Mrs. Brennan," Kowalski said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Routine inspection." "I was inspected 3 months ago," Maggie said, her voice level. "Passed with flying colors." "New regulations. City Council passed them last week. I'm sure you understand." Maggie understood perfectly, but she said nothing, just crossed her arms and watched him work. What followed was an hour of theater. Kowalski found violations that didn't exist. The grease trap installed new in 2020, certified by 3 different inspectors, was suddenly inadequate. The ventilation system, upgraded to code in 2019 at a cost of $30,000, was insufficient. The structure itself, a building that had stood for 60 years through desert heat and winter cold, had concerning foundation issues. Timothy Walker watched the whole thing, his coffee growing cold. When Kowalski finally handed Maggie the citation, Tim spoke up. "Ray, your mother would be ashamed of you." Kowalski's face went red. "Mr. Walker, I'm just doing your job." "Yeah, I heard you say that 3 times. But your job is protecting public health, not harassing honest people because someone with money told you to." Kowalski wouldn't look at either of them. He set the clipboard on the counter, mumbled something about 60 days to comply, and practically ran for the door. When he was gone, Timothy pushed his plate away. "Maggie, what was that about?" "Nothing, Tim. Just city bureaucracy." "That wasn't bureaucracy. That was a hit job." Barn, he pulled out his wallet, left a $10 bill for a $6 breakfast. "You need help, you call me. I might be old, but I still know people." After he left, Maggie picked up the citation. The fine was $15,000. The required renovations, $350,000. She had 60 days to comply, or they'd suspend her license and shut her down. The number swam in front of her eyes. $350,000. She didn't have it, couldn't get it. The diner made enough to keep the lights on and put food on her table, but not enough for this, not even close. She thought about calling Colt. He'd help. The club would help. But that would mean admitting she couldn't handle it alone. That would mean watching her son put himself at risk for her. No, she'd find another way. Maggie walked to the phone on the wall, an old rotary model, another relic Declan had insisted on keeping, and dialed a number she'd memorized decades ago. "Lydia Thornton's office." "Lydia, it's Maggie Brennan. I need a lawyer." Tuesday was worse. The bank called at 10 in the morning, just as the lunch rush was starting. Maggie excused herself, stepped into the back office, and closed the door. "Mrs. Brennan, this is David Chen from First Arizona Bank. I'm calling about your mortgage." Maggie's stomach dropped. She'd had the same mortgage for 15 years. Never missed a payment, never been late, not once. "What about it?" "We've been reviewing our portfolio and we've discovered some irregularities with your loan documentation. We're going to need you to come in and clear this up." "What kind of irregularities?" "I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Can you come to the bank this afternoon?" "I'm running a business, Mr. Chen. I can't just close down in the middle of the day." "I understand, but Mrs. Brennan, this is urgent. If we can't resolve this quickly, we may have to call the entire loan. That's $86,000, due immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. $86,000, the full remaining balance on her mortgage. Money she absolutely did not have. "That's impossible. My loan is in good standing. I have the paperwork. I'm sure we can work this out, but we need to meet. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Maggie's hand tightened on the phone. "Fine, I'll be there." She hung up and stood very still in the small office. Around her, the walls were covered with more photographs. Declan and Colt working on motorcycles together. Maggie and Declan on their 20th wedding anniversary. Colt's high school graduation. A lifetime captured in frozen moments. $86,000. Plus $350,000 for the fake violations. Nearly $500,000, all demanded within 60 days. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. Someone wanted her property badly enough to destroy her to get it, and she knew exactly who. Sterling Ashford Caldwell III, the developer who'd been buying up downtown properties for 2 years, who'd made 4 separate offers to purchase her diner, each one higher than the last, who'd smiled with teeth that didn't reach his eyes and told her that Ridgemont was evolving. The first offer had been polite, the second insistent, the third borderline aggressive. The fourth, delivered just 2 weeks ago, had come with a thinly veiled warning. "Mrs. Brennan, I'd hate to see you lose everything because you were too stubborn to recognize a good opportunity." She'd burned that letter too, but apparently Caldwell had decided to move from warnings to action. Maggie walked back into the diner, put on her smile, and served lunch to the dozen customers who'd come in. Nobody would have known anything was wrong. She'd spent 40 years perfecting that smile, that mask of cheerful competence that hid whatever storms were raging inside. It was only after closing, after the last customer left and she was alone cleaning the grill, that she let herself feel the fear. She was 68 years old, a widow, running a business that barely broke even most months, fighting an enemy with unlimited resources and no conscience. What chance did she have? But even as the fear rose, something else rose with it. Something harder, angrier. No, she said aloud to the empty diner. No, you don't get to do this. She'd survived losing Declan, survived watching him waste away over 2 years of cancer and complications, survived being a military wife during the Gulf War not knowing if her husband would come home, survived 40 years of early mornings and late nights and customer complaints and health inspections and 1,000 other challenges. She wasn't going to roll over now. If Sterling Caldwell wanted a fight, she'd give him one. Wednesday morning, Maggie met with Lydia Thornton in a small office above a flower shop on Main Street. Lydia was 58, sharp-eyed, with gray hair cut short in a manner that suggested she'd heard every lie and seen every trick in the book. She'd been practicing law in Ridgemont for 30 years, long enough to know where the bodies were buried. Maggie spread the documents across Lydia's desk, the health inspection citation, the bank's letter about the irregularities, and all 4 of Caldwell's purchase offers, including the last one, with its veiled threat. Lydia studied them in silence, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. This is coordinated, she said without preamble. The inspection, the bank, the timing. Someone with resources is targeting you. I know who, Maggie said. Sterling Caldwell. He's made 4 offers to buy my property. I refused all of them. Sterling Caldwell is a front man. Lydia took off her glasses. Maggie, I'm going to be honest with you. Caldwell doesn't have this kind of reach. Not on his own. He can't bribe a city inspector and pressure a bank and orchestrate this whole thing. There's someone behind him, someone with real power. Who? I don't know yet, but I'll find out. Lydia pulled out a legal pad. First, we fight the inspection. I'll file an appeal with the city challenge every single violation. That'll buy us time. How much time? 30 days, maybe 45 if we're lucky. The bank is trickier. They can call a loan for irregularities, but they have to prove the irregularities exist. I'll demand full documentation. Make them show their work. That'll slow them down. But Maggie, she paused. This is going to get worse before it gets better. People like this don't stop. They escalate. So what do? You fight, but you also prepare for the possibility that fighting isn't enough. Do you have savings family who could help? Maggie thought of Colt, of the club, of the brothers who called her ma and would give her anything she asked for. I have people, she said carefully, but I don't want to involve them unless I have to. Why not? Because my son has a temper, and if I tell him someone's threatening me, he'll do something that lands him in prison. I won't risk that. Lydia studied her for a long moment. You're trying to protect him. I'm his mother, that's what mothers do. Even when protecting him means not asking for help. Especially then. Lydia sighed. All right, we'll do this your way, for now. But Maggie promised me something. If this gets dangerous, and I think it will, you'll tell your son. Because protecting him doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. Maggie didn't answer, because she knew Lydia was wrong. Protecting your child always meant being willing to sacrifice yourself. That was the deal you made the day they were born. It didn't matter if they were 5 or 42. They were still your child, and you'd still take a bullet for them without thinking twice. Thursday morning, Maggie went to the bank. David Chen was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with nervous hands and a tie that looked too tight. He led her to a small conference room and spread papers across the table. Mrs. Brennan, thank you for coming in. Now about these irregularities. What followed was 45 minutes of banking jargon and circular logic. Something about the original loan documentation. Something about missing signatures. Something about the property appraisal being incorrect. None of it made sense. Maggie had the original paperwork at home. Everything had been in order when she'd refinanced 15 years ago. This was invented, manufactured, fake. But David Chen had the power of the bank behind him, and the bank had the power to destroy her. So what you're telling me, Maggie said slowly, is that you want me to pay off the entire loan because of errors that didn't exist 15 years ago, but somehow exist now. Mrs. Brennan, I understand your frustration. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like extortion. You're inventing problems so someone can swoop in and buy my property for pennies on the dollar. David's face flushed. I don't appreciate the accusation, and I don't appreciate being lied to by a kid young enough to be my grandson. Maggie stood. You want that $86,000, you'll have to foreclose. And I promise you I'll make that as difficult, impublic, and expensive as possible. She walked out, her heart-pounding hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. In the parking lot, she sat in her truck, a 1998 Ford F-150 that had belonged to Declan kept running through sheer stubbornness and duct tape and tried to catch her breath. She just declared war on a bank, on a developer, on forces she didn't fully understand but knew were more powerful than her. And she'd done it alone. But she couldn't stay alone forever. Sooner or later, Colt would find out. Sooner or later, the club would get involved. And when they did, things would escalate in ways she couldn't control. Unless she ended this first, unless she found a way to fight back, it didn't require her son putting himself at risk. Maggie pulled out her phone, a flip phone, because she'd never seen the point of those fancy smartphones, and dialed Lydia. "It's Maggie. The bank meeting was a disaster. They're definitely coming after me. What's our next move?" "We file a complaint with the State Banking Commission. Document everything." And Maggie start documenting everything else too. Every conversation with Caldwell, every interaction with city officials. We're building a case. A case for what? Harassment, possibly conspiracy. If we can prove coordination between Caldwell, the inspector, and the bank, we might be able to flip this. Make them the defendants instead of you. It was a long shot. Maggie knew it. But it was something, a path forward. A way to fight that didn't require Colt and his brothers riding in like a leather-clad cavalry. "Okay," she said. "Tell me what you need." Friday afternoon, Colt showed up at the diner unannounced. Maggie should have expected it. Her son had inherited his father's ability to sense when something was wrong even from miles away. And 3 days was longer than Colt usually went without checking on her. It was 3 o'clock, the dead period between lunch and dinner. The place was empty, except for Maggie, who was prepping vegetables for the next day's service. Colt walked in, and Maggie knew immediately that he'd found out. His face had that particular set to it, the one that meant he was angry but controlling it. The one that looked so much like Declan, it hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was level, controlled, which was worse than shouting. "Tell you what. Don't, Ma, please don't." He pulled papers from inside his jacket. Copies of the health inspection citation, the bank letters. "Ghost did some digging in the county records. Found all of this. You're being targeted, and you are going to handle it alone." Ghost, the club's tech expert, of course. Maggie should have known that anything filed with the city would be accessible to someone who knew where to look. She set down her knife and wiped her hands on her apron. "It's my business, Colt. My problem. Your problem?" His control slipped. "Ma, these people are trying to steal everything Dad built. Everything you've worked for 40 years. And you think I'm going to sit back and let it happen? I think you're going to stay out of it and let me handle it legally. I've hired Lydia Thornton. We're fighting the inspection, fighting the bank." "Legally," Colt slammed his hand on the counter, making the salt shakers jump. "These people don't play by rules, Ma. You think lawyers and appeals are going to stop them? Your father believed in the law. Dad died believing in a lot of things that didn't believe in him." Colt's voice cracked. "Ma, please, let me help." Maggie looked at her son, her boy, even though he was 42 and president of a motorcycle club, and scared grown men just by walking into a room. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear. And underneath it all, the same protective instinct that Declan had carried like a second skin. The instinct that had gotten Declan into more than one fight when someone disrespected his family. The instinct that had nearly gotten him court-martialed once in the army for taking a swing at an officer who'd insulted Maggie. That same instinct burning in Colt's eyes right now. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. "Let me investigate. Ghost can dig into Caldwell's finances, his associates, find out who's backing him, find leverage, something we can use to make them back off. And then what? Then we negotiate, make them understand that coming after you has consequences. And if they don't want to negotiate?" Colt didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was cold in a way that reminded Maggie of Declan in his darkest moments after the war. "Then we show them what happens when they threaten our family." Maggie was quiet for a long time. She could say no, could insist on handling it alone, could try to keep Colt out of it. But she'd seen the papers he was holding. Ghost had already dug into county records. The club already knew. And trying to keep Colt away now would just push him into acting without her input, without her ability to restrain him. Better to let him investigate. Better to have some control over what happened next. "Okay," she said finally. "But we do this carefully. No violence, no threats, just information gathering. And Colt, if this gets dangerous, I want you to back off. Promise me." "I can't promise that, Ma." "Then I can't let you help." They stared at each other, mother and son, locked in a battle of wills that had been going on for 42 years. Finally, Colt nodded. "I'll be careful. No unnecessary risks. But Ma, I'm not letting anyone hurt you. And I'm not letting anyone hurt you. So we both be careful. It was the best compromise they were going to get. That night in the basement of the Hell Angels clubhouse on the outskirts of Ridgemont, 30 men gathered around a scarred wooden table that had seen more planning sessions than most war rooms. They were a cross-section of America's working class. Former military, Army, Marines, Navy, even one retired Air Force loadmaster. Mechanics with hands permanently stained with grease. Construction workers with sun-damaged skin and permanent squints. A few with college degrees they'd never used. One former accountant who'd walked away from a six-figure job because he couldn't stand the corporate bullshit anymore. Men who'd found purpose and brotherhood in the structure of a motorcycle club. Men who'd sworn oaths to each other that meant more than any contract or legal document. Colt stood at the head of the table, his cut marking him as their leader. The president patch over his heart wasn't just decoration. It was responsibility, authority, the weight of 30 lives that depended on his decisions. Brothers, he said, and the room fell instantly silent. You all know my mother. Some of you've known her for 20 years. She's fed you, listened to you, helped you when you needed it. She's never asked for anything in return. Heads nodded around the table. Every man there had a story about Maggie. The time she'd given Ghost money for car repairs when he was broke. The time she'd let Sledgehammer crash in her garage when his ex-wife kicked him out. The time she'd driven Reaper to the VA hospital when he was having a PTSD episode and couldn't trust himself behind a wheel. Chapter Mom. That's what they called her, and it wasn't honorary. Now she needs us. Colt's jaw tightened. Sterling Caldwell, the developer who's been buying up downtown properties, he's targeting Ma's diner. Fake health violations, bank pressure, intimidation. Ghost pulled the records. This is coordinated, professional, and it's going to get worse. Sledgehammer, the club's vice president, spoke up. He was a mountain of a man, 6'5" and 280, with arms like tree trunks and a surprisingly gentle voice. What do you need, Prez? Intelligence. Everything on Caldwell. Who he works for. Where his money comes from. What leverage we can use. Ghost, you're on point for this. Ghost nodded. He was younger than most of the brothers, maybe 35, with the lean build of someone who spent more time with computers than weights. Former NSA contractor before he'd gotten burned out and walked away. The kind of man who could find anything if you gave him enough time and a decent internet connection. I'll need 48 hours, Ghost said, but I'll find it. Do it. Colt looked around the table. This stays quiet for now. No moves until we know what we're dealing with. But understand this, if they come after my mother again, we respond with everything we have. A voice from the back. What if it's bigger than Caldwell? What if he's got backing from someone serious? Then we call in the Brotherhood. Colt's voice was flat, final. I'll reach out to every chapter from here to the Pacific. If we need 1,000 riders, we'll get 1,000 riders. The room erupted in murmurs. 1,000 riders was serious. It was a statement. It was war. Sledgehammer leaned forward, his massive forearms on the table. Prez, you sure? That's a hell of a commitment. National level. The kind of thing that gets attention from feds and cops and media. My father's last words to me, Colt said slowly, were protect your mother. I made him a promise. And I'll call in every favor, burn every bridge, and risk every consequence to keep it. Silence, complete and total. Then one by one the brothers nodded, because they understood. Because most of them had made similar promises to their own parents, their own families. And because in the world of motorcycle clubs, family came first. Always. One more thing, Colt said. Ma doesn't want violence. Doesn't want us doing anything that lands us in prison. So we play this smart. Legal, information first, leverage second, force only as a last resort. Clear. Clear came the response from 30 throats. Good, get to work. Ghost was as good as his word. By Sunday morning, he had a file thick enough to choke a horse. They met at the clubhouse, just Colt, Sledgehammer, and Ghost. The younger man spread printouts across the table like a card dealer, revealing a royal flush, and what he revealed made Colt's blood run cold. Sterling Caldwell is a front, Ghost said without preamble. Harvard law degree, worked as a prosecutor in Phoenix until 2018. Clean record, good reputation. Then suddenly he quits and goes into real estate development. But people change careers, Sledgehammer said. Not like this. Look at the timeline. In the last 2 years, Caldwell has purchased 18 properties in Ridgemont. Total value about $12 million. For a guy who quit a prosecutor job that paid maybe 90 grand a year, that's suspicious. So where's the money coming from, Colt asked. Ghost pulled up another document. Shell company called Desert Viper Development, LLC, registered in Nevada. Ownership buried under 3 layers of other shell companies. But I kept digging. He laid out a flowchart showing the money trail. It all traces back to one man, Vincent Costello, also known as Viper. The name meant nothing to Colt. Who is he? 58 years old, based in Las Vegas. On the surface, he's a legitimate real estate investor, owns property development companies, casino interests, commercial real estate across the Southwest. But under the surface, Ghost's expression was grim. FBI has a file on him, suspected organized crime, money laundering, extortion. 3 suspected murders they can't prove. The room went cold down. How suspected? Colt asked carefully. Enough that the Bureau's been investigating him for 5 years. Never enough evidence to make charges stick. He's smart, insulated, uses people like Caldwell to do the dirty work while he stays clean. Ghost pulled out a newspaper clipping, the paper yellowed with age. The headline read, "Mysterious Fire Destroys Family Restaurant Flagstaff." This was 2021, Ghost said. Family-owned Mexican restaurant called Rosa's. Been in business 35 years. Costello's companies made multiple offers to buy the property. The owners refused. 3 weeks later, the building burned to the ground. Fire marshal ruled it accidental, faulty gas line. But look at this. He pulled out another article from 6 months later. Same fire marshal was arrested for taking bribes in an unrelated case. Turns out he'd been on the take for years, ruling fires as accidental when they were clearly arson. The investigation into Rosa's was reopened, but by then the trail was cold. The owners, Colt's voice was tight. Grandfather who ran the place got out with severe burns over 60% of his body. Spent 4 months in a hospital burn unit. Lost everything. Property sold at auction for a fraction of its value. Guess who bought it? Costello. One of his shell companies, yeah. Same pattern in 3 other towns. Nevada, New Mexico, California. Find a property he wants, make offers, get refused, apply pressure. If the owner still won't sell, things escalate. Usually fire. Sometimes just violence. Always something that can't be directly traced back to him. Sledgehammer cracked his knuckles, a sound like breaking wood. So Ma's not just dealing with some greedy developer, she's dealing with organized crime. Yeah, Ghost looked at Colt. Prez, this is serious. These aren't people you negotiate with. They're people who make problems disappear. Colt stared at the photograph of the burned-out restaurant, at the caption showing the elderly owner, his face wrapped in bandages, his life destroyed because he'd refused to sell his family's business. They'll try to burn Ma's diner, he said quietly. If the legal pressure doesn't work, yeah, that's their pattern. Escalate until the target breaks or disappears. Not going to happen. Colt's voice was ice. Not to Ma. So what's the play? Sledgehammer asked. Colt was silent for a long moment, processing. Ghost was right. They weren't dealing with simple real estate fraud. They were dealing with a criminal organization that had resources, connections, and a track record of violence, which meant the rules had just changed. We protect the diner, Colt said finally, 24/7, rotating shifts. Nobody goes near that building without us knowing about it. If they want to burn it down, they'll have to go through us. And Caldwell, I'm going to have a conversation with him. Let him know we've made him. See if he's smart enough to back off. Want company? No, this one I do alone, but Sledge, I want you to start reaching out to other chapters. Quietly. Feel out who'd be willing to ride if we need them. Phoenix, Tucson, Vegas, New Mexico. I want to know what our numbers could be if this goes national. You're serious about calling in 1,000 riders? I'm serious about protecting my mother. However many riders that takes. Ghost cleared his throat. Prez, there's one more thing. If Costello is who I think he is, he's got cops on the payroll, judges, politicians. You start a war with him, and you might find out that the people who are supposed to protect you are actually working for him. Then we don't trust cops or judges or politicians, Colt said. We trust each other, and we make sure everything we do is legal and documented. Because if they want to paint us as the bad guys, they'll have to explain why a dozen bikers protecting an elderly widow from arson is somehow criminal. It was a calculated risk. But everything about this situation was a risk now. Get me everything you can on Costello, Colt said. Financial records, property holdings, known associates, anything that might give us leverage. And Ghost, find out if the FBI really is investigating him. Because if they are, we might have allies we don't even know about yet. Ghost nodded and started packing up his papers. As he and Sledgehammer headed for the door, Colt stayed behind, staring at that photograph of the burned restaurant. This was bigger than he'd expected, more dangerous, more complex. But none of that mattered, because his mother was in danger and he'd made a promise to his father. A deathbed promise. The kind you don't break no matter what. Protect your mother, whatever it takes. The first motorcycles arrived at 4 in the morning when Ridgemont was still dark and the desert air carried the last whispers of night cold. They came from the east, a river of headlights flowing down Highway 60 like a slow-moving constellation. 300 riders from Phoenix, their engines throttled low out of respect for the sleeping town. But even at idle, 300 Harleys make a sound that rattles windows and stirs dreams. Hammer led them in his road glide at the front of the formation. Behind him, the Phoenix chapter rolled in tight parade order, 2 columns that stretched back a quarter mile. They wore their cuts despite the chill, the Hell Angels patches visible even in the pre-dawn darkness. Some had American flags mounted on their bikes, others flew the black POWMIA banner. All of them mowed with purpose. They parked on Main Street in perfect rows, backing their bikes into the angled spaces with military precision. When the engines finally cut off, the silence that followed felt heavy, expectant. 300 men dismounted. 300 men stretched road-weary muscles. And 300 men waited. Hammer walked to the corner of Main and Route 66 where Brennan's diner sat dark and quiet. He lit a cigarette and checked his watch. 5 more chapters were still on the road. They'd all arrived before 8, before the rally, before everything changed. An hour later, the Tucson chapter rolled in, 250 strong, led by a man called Reaper, who'd ridden with Colt in Iraq. Then Flagstaff. Then Vegas, their cuts marking them as desert brothers, men who understood the particular brutality of the Southwest sun and the loyalty it forged. By 7 o'clock, the New Mexico chapters had arrived. By 7:30, the California border riders crossed into Arizona. And by 8, when the sun finally crested the Superstition Mountains to the east, Main Street Ridgemont had transformed into something the town had never seen. 1,200 motorcycles, 1,200 leather cuts, 1,200 men standing in loose formation, drinking coffee from thermoses, checking weapons they carried legally, but hoped not to use. The residents of Ridgemont woke to find their town occupied by an army that wore no uniform, but shared a common code. Some looked out their windows and locked their doors. Others came outside to stare. And a few, the older ones, the veterans, who recognized the bearing and discipline of these men, nodded in understanding and respect. At 8:30, Colt emerged from the clubhouse with Sledgehammer and Ghost flanking him. He wore his cut, his president patch catching the morning light. His boots hit the pavement with the measured stride of a man who'd learned to walk like this in the army, when you had to project confidence even when mortars were falling. He walked to the center of the gathering, climbed onto the bed of a flatbed truck. Someone had parked there for exactly this purpose, and looked out at 1,200 faces. "Brothers," he said, and his voice carried in the desert air. "You came from hundreds of miles away. Some of you I know, some of you I've never met, but you came because that's what brotherhood means." The crowd was silent, listening. Today is not about violence. Today is about showing strength, unity. We are here to send a message. Margaret Brennan is under our protection. Anyone who threatens her, threatens all of us. Heads nodded, a few murmurs of agreement. We will march through downtown. We will make our voices heard, but we do it clean. No weapons visible, no threats, just presence. Just 1,200 men standing up for what's right. Are we clear? Clear. The response came from 1,200 throats, a sound like thunder rolling across the desert floor. Colt climbed down from the truck. Sledgehammer clapped him on the shoulder. "Hell of a turnout, Prez." "Yeah," Colt said quietly, looking at the sea of leather and chrome. "Now I just hope we don't need them." But in his gut, he knew better. Vincent Costello wasn't the kind of man who backed down from a show of force. He was the kind who escalated, who doubled down, who turned demonstrations into bloodbaths if it served his purposes. Colt had read the file Ghost assembled. He knew about the restaurant in Flagstaff, the suspicious fire, the owner who'd barely survived. He knew about 2 other incidents in Nevada, both ending with property owners and hospitals, and Costello's companies taking possession of their land. This wasn't going to end with a peaceful march. Colt knew it the way soldiers know when the wire's about to get hit, the way you can feel an ambush before you see it. But he'd made a promise to his father, and he'd be damned if he broke it now. At 9 o'clock, Colt rode his Road King to his mother's house. 50 chapter officers followed, forming an escort that would have made the Secret Service jealous. They rolled up to the small cottage on Mesquite Avenue, and Colt killed his engine. Maggie was waiting on the porch. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her gray hair pulled back, her face showing every one of her 68 years. In her hands, she held a leather jacket. Not hers. Colt's spare, the one he kept in his saddlebag for passengers. You ready, Ma? Colt called. As I'll ever be. She walked down the steps with the careful gait of someone whose knees had logged 4 decades standing on restaurant floors. Colt helped her onto the back of his bike, showed her where to put her feet, reminded her to lean with him in the turns. Hold on tight, he said. Always do, she replied. They rolled back toward Main Street with the escorts surrounding them, and as they turned onto the main drag, something happened that Colt hadn't expected. People lined the sidewalks, not hiding behind locked doors, not cowering in fear, standing there, watching. And as Maggie rode past on the back of her son's motorcycle, an old woman on the corner started clapping. Then another joined her, then a man, then more. Until the entire block was applauding, and Colt felt something catch in his throat. When they reached the town square where 1,200 bikers had gathered in formation, Sledgehammer helped Maggie dismount. She stood there small and gray-haired and overwhelmed, looking at an army that had assembled for her. Then Hammer the Phoenix president stepped forward. He was a big man, 6'4" and 250, with a beard that reached his chest and arms covered in ink. He looked like exactly the kind of person suburban mothers warned their children about. He took off his sunglasses, and his eyes were wet. Mrs. Brennan, he said, his voice rough, 3 years ago my son died. Overdose, fentanyl. He was 23. I rode through Ridgemont that night, broken in pieces, didn't know where I was going or why. Your diner was the only place open. You fed me. You sat with me. You listened to me cry about my boy. You didn't ask for money, didn't judge, just cared. He paused, swallowed hard. Today, I repay that kindness. We all do. One by one, other bikers stepped forward, each with a story, each with a moment when Maggie had shown them humanity, when the world had shown them none. The kid whose bike had broken down outside Ridgemont in a thunderstorm, who Maggie had let sleep in the diner's back room. The veteran with PTSD who'd shown up at closing time shaking and lost, who Maggie had fed and called the VA for. The brother whose cut had been stolen, who Maggie had given money to replace it, never asking to be repaid. By the time they finished, Maggie was crying openly, and 1,200 men stood in respectful silence. I don't know what to say, she finally managed. You don't have to say anything, Ma, Hammer replied. You already said it. With every meal, every kindness, every time you treated us like human beings instead of criminals. Now we say it back. A chant started somewhere in the back, quiet at first, then growing. Maggie, Maggie, Maggie. It rolled through the crowd like a wave, and Maggie Brennan, who'd spent her entire life taking care of others, finally understood that she wasn't alone anymore. But at that moment, 3 blocks away, 4 black SUVs pulled up to the perimeter of the gathering. FBI agents emerged, their suits and earpieces marking them as clearly as any uniform. The lead agent, a man in his 50s with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many years chasing bad guys, walked directly toward Colt. Mr. Brennan, Agent Marcus Reeves, FBI, I need to speak with you. Now. Colt studied him for a moment, then nodded. They walked to a quiet corner out of earshot of the crowd. I'm going to be straight with you, Reeves said without preamble. FBI has been investigating Vincent Costello for 14 months. Money laundering, extortion, 3 suspected murders we can't prove. Sterling Caldwell is cooperating with us. We're close to bringing Costello down. So arrest him, Colt said flatly. It's not that simple. We need airtight evidence. Costello insulates himself with layers of lawyers and shell companies. Your rally here, this show of force, it could spook him, make him run, or destroy evidence before we can move. My mother is in danger. I'm not waiting for your investigation. Reeves' expression softened slightly. I'm not asking you to wait. I'm asking you to stay legal. Make your statement. Show your numbers. But don't give Costello's lawyers ammunition to paint you as the aggressors. Colt was quiet for a moment, processing. What do you need from me? Keep it peaceful. If Costello makes a move, and I think he will let us handle it, you have my word. If he threatens your mother, I will bury him. Your word better be good, Agent. It is. But understand something. Reeves leaned closer. Costello isn't stupid. He knows what's happening here. And men like him, when they're cornered, they do desperate things. Watch your mother. Watch yourself. Because I guarantee he's already made his play. They parted ways, and Colt returned to the gathering with a sick feeling in his stomach. Reeves was right. This felt too easy. 1,200 bikers show up, FBI presence, media attention. Costello should be backing down, cutting his losses. But men like Costello didn't cut losses. They doubled down. Colt found Sledgehammer and pulled him aside. I want eyes everywhere. Rooftops, parking lots, any elevated position within 500 yards. If someone so much as looks at Ma wrong, I want to know about it. You think he'll try something here in front of everyone? I think he's crazy enough to try anything. While Colt organized security, Vincent Costello sat in his penthouse office in Las Vegas, 1,500 miles away, watching a live feed of the rally on his laptop. His face showed no emotion. His voice when he spoke into his phone was calm. Silas, are you in position? 200 yards from the Rusty Iron Tavern, on the roof of a three-story building that overlooked the parking lot where the rally would culminate, a man lay prone behind a Macmillan TAC-3 .38 sniper rifle. Silas Monroe had been discharged from the Army Rangers 5 years ago for reasons the Army preferred not to discuss. Since then, he'd made a comfortable living doing what he did best, killing people from very far away. In position, Silas replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Target is the sun, Colt Brennan. Wait until he's speaking. Maximum visibility. I want everyone to see what happens when people cross me. What about the crowd? There are over 1,000 people down there. Collateral damage. Just make the shot count. Silas adjusted his scope and settled into wait. He'd made harder shots than this. 700 yards in Kandahar target moving 30-mile-an-hour wind. This was almost insulting in its simplicity. 200 yards, no wind stationary target. He'd wait until the speech. Until Colt Brennan stood in front of his 1,200 brothers and his mother and felt safe. Then Silas would squeeze the trigger and Colt would drop like a puppet with its strings cut. Simple, clean, professional. What Silas didn't account for was a mother's instinct. What he didn't account for was 40 years of military wife training, the kind that taught you to spot threats before they materialized. What he didn't account for was Margaret Brennan. At 11 o'clock, the march began. 1,200 bikers walking, not riding down Main Street in complete silence. No engines, no shouts. Just boots on pavement, a river of leather and purpose flowing through the heart of Ridgemont. Residents came out to watch, some in fear, yes, but more in curiosity, in support. Shop owners stood in doorways. Veterans stood on corners, some saluting as the bikers passed. By the time they reached Town Square again, the crowd had swelled with locals who wanted to witness this moment, whatever it meant. Colt climbed onto the makeshift stage and 1,200 men fell silent. Ridgemont, he began, his voice carrying across the square. We are not your enemies. We are your neighbors. Many of us are veterans. We work. We pay taxes. We love this country, but we will not stand by while powerful men crush small business owners. Behind him, Maggie stood flanked by Sledgehammer and 3 other chapter officers. She'd wanted to stay on the stage with Colt, but he'd insisted she stay back, stay protected. Now she watched her son with a mixture of pride and fear that every mother knows. Margaret Brennan represents the American dream, Colt continued. Work hard. Follow the rules. Build something that lasts. Sterling Caldwell and Vincent Costello represent something else. Greed, corruption, the belief that might makes right. 200 yards away, Silas Monroe acquired his target. Colt Brennan center, mass clear shot. His finger moved to the trigger. 1 breath. 2. On the 3rd, he'd fire. We ask you, Colt said, stand with us. Stand with Maggie. Stand against. That's when Maggie saw it. A red dot, impossibly small, dancing on her son's chest. Time collapsed. She was 34 again, standing in a classroom at Camp Pendleton, while a grim-faced sergeant taught military spouses how to identify threats. Laser sights. The way they looked, the way they moved, how you had exactly 1 second to react. She didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't weigh risks or consequences. She moved. Colt down! Her voice cut across the square like a knife, and even as the words left her mouth, she was launching herself forward. 68 years old with bad knees and arthritis in her hands, but in that moment she moved like a woman half her age. She hit Colt from behind her small frame, colliding with his much larger one, her hands shoving him sideways with desperate strength. The crack of the rifle shot came a split second later. The .308 round that would have punched through Colt's heart caught Maggie instead high on her left shoulder. The impact spun her halfway around. Blood sprayed across Colt's face, hot and copper-smelling. She felt no pain at first, just a massive impact like being hit by a car. Then her legs gave out and she was falling. Colt's arms caught her before she hit the ground. Ma, no. His voice, desperate, broken, the sound of every nightmare he'd ever had made real. Chaos erupted. 1,200 men reacted with the speed of their training. Weapons materialized from concealed holsters and jacket liners. The night lit up with muzzle flashes as 50 bikers returned fire toward the rooftop where Silas had taken his shot. Silas never expected return fire. Never expected that many of these bikers were former military with instincts honed in places like Fallujah and Helmand province. He took 3 rounds in rapid succession, 2 through his left leg, 1 through his shoulder. He rolled away from his rifle, tried to crawl to the roof access, but his leg wouldn't support him. In the parking lot behind the tavern, 2 of Costello's enforcers opened fire on the crowd with pistols, trying to create maximum chaos. They managed exactly 6 shots before they were swarmed by bikers who'd been waiting for exactly this. The gunfight lasted 30 seconds and ended with both enforcers dead on the pavement. But Maggie saw none of this. She lay in her son's arms, blood soaking through her blouse, spreading in a dark stain that grew with each heartbeat. Her vision was already going gray at the edges. Her lungs felt full of cotton. "Colt," she whispered. "You okay?" "May, don't talk. Stay with me. Medic. Somebody get a medic." But Maggie was smiling, or trying to. Her face felt numb. "Told you," she managed. "I'd protect you." "Mama, no, you're not dying." "Not today." Somewhere distant, sirens wailed, boots pounded pavement. Someone was pressing cloth against her shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. Hands lifted her onto a gurney. Colt tried to follow, but Sledgehammer held him back. "Prez, let them work. She needs the ER, not you getting in the way." Colt collapsed onto his knees, his hands covered in his mother's blood, and for the first time since his father's funeral 8 years ago, he wept. Around him, 1,200 men stood in shocked silence. They'd come to show strength, to demonstrate solidarity, to protect a woman who'd shown them kindness. Instead, they'd watched her take a bullet meant for her son. The ambulance screamed away toward street. Mary's Regional Hospital, its sirens Doppler shifting as it disappeared around the corner. FBI agents swarmed the scene. Media helicopters circled overhead like vultures. And Colt Brennan knelt in a spreading pool of his mother's blood, staring at his hands, understanding with perfect clarity that everything had just changed. Hammer approached, knelt beside him. "Brother, we need to get you cleaned up. The ma's going to need you strong when she wakes up." "If she wakes up," Colt said hollowly, "she'll wake up. She's Maggie. She's tougher than all of us." But even Hammer's voice lacked conviction. They'd all seen the amount of blood. They'd all seen the way Maggie's eyes had gone distant before the medics loaded her. FBI agent Reeves appeared, his face grim. "Mr. Brennan, we have the shooter, Silas Monroe, former Army Ranger. He's wounded but alive. He'll talk." "Costello sent him," Colt said flatly. "We believe so. We're moving on him now, full tactical team hitting his compound in Vegas within the hour. But I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Stand down. Let us handle this. Don't give Costello's lawyers anything to use against you. Don't make yourself a target." Colt stood slowly. He was taller than Reeves by 3 inches, and in that moment, with blood on his hands and murder in his eyes, he looked like exactly what he was, a man on the edge of violence. "Agent Reeves," he said quietly, "my mother just took a bullet meant for me, in front of 1,200 witnesses. You think I'm going to stand down? You think I'm going to let the justice system handle this at its own pace while she's in surgery, fighting for her life?" "Mr. Brennan, no, you listen to me. I will not break the law. I will not give you or anyone else a reason to arrest me. But I'm not leaving Ridgemont. None of us are. We're staying right here until Costello is in chains and my mother is safe. And if you don't like that, you're welcome to try moving 1,200 bikers who've just watched their ma get shot." Reeves held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But if anything happens, anything that could be construed as vigilante justice, I will arrest you. Clear. Crystal." Reeves walked away, already on his phone coordinating the Vegas raid. Colt turned to face the 1,200 men who stood waiting for his word. "Brothers," he said, and his voice carried despite the chaos around them. "They shot our ma. They tried to kill her in front of us. They thought we'd scatter. They were wrong." The crowd pressed closer, listening. "We're not leaving, not until she wakes up, not until Costello is in prison. We occupy this town, legal, peaceful, but absolute. No one comes in or out without us knowing. No business for Caldwell or any of his associates. We shut it down, all of it, until justice is served." A roar of approval went up from the crowd. Sledgehammer stepped forward. "What's the play, Prez?" Colt's face was stone. "We make them understand. When you come after a Hell Angel's mother, there are consequences. And we're going to teach Costello and everyone like him exactly what those consequences look like." The bikers dispersed with military efficiency, organizing themselves into shifts, establishing perimeters, setting up a command structure that would have impressed any Army officer. Within an hour, Ridgemont was effectively under biker control. Not through violence, not through threats, but through sheer presence. 200 bikers set up camp in Town Square, Another 300 took over the parking lots near Caldwell's office buildings. Others established checkpoints on every major road. And at the hospital where Maggie fought for her life, 50 bikers maintained a vigil in the parking lot. By nightfall, every major news network had crews in Ridgemont. The story was too big to ignore. Biker Army occupies Arizona town after crime boss shoots their mother. It led every evening broadcast from coast to coast. And in Las Vegas, in a penthouse suite that overlooked the Strip, Vincent Costello watched the coverage with growing unease. He'd meant to send a message, to show that he couldn't be intimidated. Instead, he'd created a martyr and united an enemy he'd badly underestimated. His phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Vincent, we have a problem. FBI just executed warrants on 6 of your properties. They're seizing records, and they have Silas. He's talking." Costello said nothing. He simply ended the call, walked to his window, and looked out at the glittering city below. He'd made a mistake, a bad one. But he wasn't finished yet. Men like Vincent Costello didn't surrender. They adapted. They found new angles, new pressure points. If the FBI wanted to play games, he'd play games. If the bikers wanted a siege, he'd give them a siege. And if Margaret Brennan survived her surgery, well, there were other ways to make people disappear. But first, he needed to disappear himself. Before the FBI tactical team reached his building, before they could arrest him in front of cameras and make him look weak, he made 3 calls, transferred money to accounts in the Caymans, arranged private transportation. And then Vincent Costello, who'd built an empire on intimidation and violence, did what powerful men always do when the law finally catches up. He ran. The waiting room at St. Mary's Regional Hospital smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Colt sat in a plastic chair that was too small for him, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He'd washed the blood off, but he could still feel it, on his skin, in his hair, behind his eyes every time he blinked. 3 hours. That's how long his mother had been in surgery. 3 hours of doctors working to save a life that shouldn't have needed saving. 3 hours of Colt replaying the moment over and over, seeing the red dot, hearing his mother's voice, feeling her hands on his back as she shoved him aside. She'd moved so fast, impossibly fast for a 68-year-old woman with bad knees. Like she'd been training for that moment her entire life. Maybe she had been. Military wives learn things. How to spot threats, how to react. Declan had taught her during those tense months before the Gulf deployment, when every military family knew that Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons and might use them on American forces. Maggie had learned to recognize laser sights, to understand firing positions, to move without thinking when danger presented itself. Those lessons had been dormant for 33 years. But when the moment came, her body remembered. Sledgehammer sat beside Colt, silent. Around them, the waiting room was packed with bikers, 50 men who'd refused to leave, who'd organized themselves into shifts, maintaining presence, making sure Maggie knew she wasn't alone, even if she couldn't see them yet. A doctor emerged through the double doors, still wearing surgical scrubs, a mask hanging around his neck. He was young, maybe 40, with the exhausted eyes of someone who'd just fought a battle. "Mr. Brennan." Colt stood so fast the chair scraped backward. "How is she?" "Your mother is remarkable." The bullet hit her scapula, fragmented on impact. Pieces went in multiple directions. One fragment nicked her subclavian artery, another lodged near her clavicle. She lost nearly 3 units of blood. But she's alive. She's alive, stable. The next 48 hours are critical, but if there's no infection, no complications, she should recover fully. It'll be a long road. Physical therapy, pain management. But she's tough. Colt's knees went weak with relief. Sledgehammer caught his arm, steadied him. "Can I see her? She's in ICU, sedated. You can sit with her, but she won't wake for hours, maybe days. Her body needs time to heal." The doctor led Colt through a maze of corridors to the intensive care unit. The ICU was quiet, just the beep of monitors and the hiss of ventilators. Maggie lay in the 3rd bed, tubes running from her arms, a breathing tube down her throat, machines tracking every heartbeat and breath. She looked small in the hospital bed, fragile. Nothing like the woman who'd raised him, who'd run a diner for 40 years, who'd survived Declan's slow death from war wounds and cancer. Colt pulled a chair close and took her hand. It was cold. He rubbed it gently, trying to warm it. "Ma," he said quietly, "I'm here. You're going to be okay." The doctor said, "You're tough," which we already knew. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Maggie didn't respond. "I'm sorry," Colt continued, his voice breaking. "This is my fault. I brought 1,200 brothers here, made us a target. I should have protected you better." He thought about his father's deathbed, that moment 8 years ago when everything had changed. Declan had been 62, eaten alive by cancer that the doctors said probably came from burn pit exposure in the Gulf. He'd wasted away over 6 months going from a strong man who could still work on engines to a skeleton who could barely lift his head. Colt had been there at the end, holding his father's hand in a hospice room at the Phoenix Fave. "Son," Declan had whispered, his voice barely audible. "Promise me something." "Anything, Dad. Take care of your ma, protect her. She's the strongest person I know, but she needs you. Promise me." "I promise, Dad, I promise." "Good boy." Declan's eyes had closed. "Make me proud, Colt. Live with honor. Your brothers in the club, they're family too. But your ma comes first. Always first." Those had been his last words. 48 hours later, Declan Brennan was gone and Colt had spent 8 years trying to keep that promise. Now sitting in the ICU watching his mother fight for her life, he felt like he'd failed. "I promised Dad I'd protect you," he said, "and I let you get shot. I'm so sorry, Ma. I'm so sorry." He stayed there for an hour holding her hand, talking to her even though she couldn't hear. Telling her about the rally, about the 1,200 brothers who'd shown up, about how the whole country was watching, how this had become something bigger than any of them expected. Finally, Sledgehammer appeared in the doorway. "Prez, we need you outside. FBI's here. They got news." Colt kissed his mother's forehead and stood. "I'll be back, Ma, I promise." In the hospital parking lot, Agent Reeves waited beside a black SUV. His face was grim. "Costello ran," he said without preamble. "By the time our tactical team hit his compound, he was gone. We're tracking his financial movements, but he had contingencies. Multiple passports, offshore accounts. He could be anywhere." Colt felt rage building in his chest like pressure in a boiler. "So he gets away after what he did?" "No, we have Silas Monroe. He's talking, giving us everything. Phone records, meeting locations, financial transfers. We'll find Costello, but it might take time." "How much time? Days, maybe weeks." "Weeks," Colt's voice went cold. "My mother could have died. She's lying in there with tubes in her arms because that bastard ordered a hit. And you want me to wait weeks?" "Mr. Brennan, I understand your anger, but no, you don't understand." Colt stepped closer. "You don't understand what it's like to watch your mother take a bullet, to hold her while she bleeds out, to sit in a waiting room wondering if the last words you said to her were good enough." Reeves held his ground. "You're right, I don't. But I know what happens if you take matters into your own hands. You become the criminal. Costello's lawyers would love that. They'd use it to muddy the waters, make this about biker violence instead of organized crime." Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Fine, I won't break the law. But I'm not leaving Ridgemont. None of us are. We stay until Costello is in custody and my mother is awake and safe. That could be days. Then we stay for days." Reeves studied him. "What exactly are you planning? Peaceful protest, economic pressure? We're going to make it impossible for Caldwell and anyone associated with Costello to do business in this town. Legal, visible, and absolutely unrelenting. That's still going to hurt innocent people. Business owners who have nothing to do with this. Then they should thank Costello for that. Not us." Reeves sighed. "I can't stop you. But I'm warning you, if there's violence, if anyone gets hurt, I will arrest everyone involved." "Understood." The agent left and Colt turned to face the 50 bikers who'd gathered in the parking lot. "Brothers," he said, and they pressed closer. "Costello ran. The FBI's hunting him, but it could take time. So here's what we're doing. We're occupying Ridgemont, not with violence, with presence. We make this town ours until justice is served." "What's the play?" someone called out. "We shut down every business associated with the Caldwell. We block access to his properties. We make it impossible for him to operate. And we do it legally. Park on public streets. Protest on public property. But we don't leave. We don't back down. We show the world what happens when you come after our family." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Sledge organized rotating shifts. "I want 200 men in town square at all times. Another 200 on patrol. The rest can get hotel rooms, but nobody leaves Ridgemont without permission." "On it, Prez. Hammer coordinate with the other chapter presidents. Make sure everyone understands the rules. No violence, no property damage, but maximum pressure. Consider it done. And someone get word to the media. I want cameras everywhere. I want the whole country watching what we're doing and why we're doing it." The bikers dispersed with the efficiency of a military operation. Within 2 hours, Ridgemont had transformed from a sleepy Arizona town into something else entirely. Something that looked like occupation, but felt like justice. 200 motorcycles parked in town square, their riders setting up tents and camping gear as if preparing for a siege. Another 100 bikes blocked the street in front of Caldwell's office building, parked legally but positioned so that no one could enter without walking through a gauntlet of leather-clad bikers. More bikes appeared at every property Caldwell owned, not blocking entrances, not threatening anyone, just present, watching, making it clear that business as usual was over. By Monday morning, the economic impact was undeniable. Shops that Caldwell had planned to force out suddenly found themselves with more foot traffic than they'd seen in years. Tourists came to Ridgemont to witness the occupation. News crews set up permanent positions, and every person who came spent money at local businesses that weren't associated with Caldwell. Meanwhile, Caldwell's property sat empty. His office received no visitors. His development projects ground to a halt. Because who wanted to do business in a building surrounded by bikers? The national media ate it up. CNN ran a segment titled "Biker Army Occupies Arizona Town." Fox News interviewed residents who supported the protest. MSNBC did a deep dive into Costello's criminal empire. And social media exploded with hashtags like "Bikers for Justice" and "Protect Maggie." Public opinion shifted hard in favor of the bikers. These weren't criminals. They were veterans and workers and fathers standing up for an elderly woman who'd shown them kindness. The image of Margaret Brennan taking a bullet for her son became iconic overnight. Artists created tributes, musicians wrote songs, and donations poured into a fund Sledgehammer had set up to cover her medical bills. On Tuesday, something unexpected happened. Ridgemont residents started joining the protest. It began with old Timothy Walker, the man who'd been eating breakfast at Maggie's Diner since the 80s. He showed up in town square with a folding chair and a thermos of coffee and sat down among the bikers. "What are you doing here, Tim?" Hammer asked. "Same thing you are. Standing up for Maggie. She's been good to this town for 40 years. Time we return the favor." By afternoon, 20 residents had joined him. By evening, 50. They brought food for the bikers, coffee, blankets. And their presence sent a message that this wasn't just a biker protest anymore. It was a community standing together. On Wednesday morning, 3 members of the city council resigned. The pressure had become too much. The media attention, the protesters, the FBI investigation that now included their financial records. Sterling Caldwell watched it all unfold from his empty office, and for the first time in his career, he felt genuine fear. His phone had stopped ringing. His business partners had stopped returning calls, and the FBI had made it clear that cooperation was his only path forward. That afternoon, he walked out of his office building past the wall of bikers who watched him in silence and drove directly to the FBI field office in Phoenix. On Thursday, Margaret Brennan opened her eyes. It was 6 in the morning. Colt was asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head on the mattress still holding her hand. He'd barely left her side in 4 days, surviving on hospital coffee and whatever food Sledgehammer brought him. Maggie's throat burned from the breathing tube they'd removed yesterday. Her shoulder felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through it. But she was awake, alive. She squeezed Colt's hand, his head jerked up, eyes wild with sleep and worry. Then he saw her looking at him, and his face crumpled with relief. "Ma, oh God, Ma, you're awake." "Water," she croaked. He fumbled for the plastic cup on the bedside table, held the straw to her lips. The water was lukewarm and tasted like plastic, but it was the best thing she'd ever had. "What happened?" she managed. "You took a bullet for me, Ma. You saved my life." Memories flooded back. The red dot, the push, the impact, the falling. Costello ran, FBI's hunting him. "But Ma, you need to know what's happening. There are 1,200 bikers in Ridgemont. They've been here since Sunday. They're not leaving until you're safe and Costello's in prison." Maggie tried to process this. 1,200. "Yeah, the whole brotherhood came. And Ma, the town's with us. The residents, the business owners, everyone. You're a hero." "I'm not a hero, I'm just a mom." "You're both." Colt's voice broke. "You're both, Ma, and I love you so much." She managed a weak smile. "Love you too, baby. Now help me sit up. I want to see these brothers of yours." The doctors protested. She needed rest, needed to heal. But Maggie had spent 40 years taking care of other people. She wasn't going to lie in bed while 1,200 men camped out on her behalf. By afternoon, she was in a wheelchair, her shoulder immobilized in a sling, her face pale but determined. Colt wheeled her to the window that overlooked the parking lot where 50 bikers maintained their vigil. When they saw her, a cheer went up that could be heard 3 blocks away. On Friday, the FBI announced they'd located Vincent Costello. He'd made it to Mexico trying to cross into Central America with a fake passport. Mexican federal police had arrested him at the request of the U.S. government. He was being extradited to face charges. The news spread through Ridgemont like wildfire. In town square, 1,200 bikers erupted in celebration. Not with violence, not with destruction, but with the kind of controlled joy that comes from seeing justice done. Agent Reeves held a press conference that evening standing in front of a wall of TV cameras. Vincent Costello is in federal custody facing multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, money laundering, extortion, and RICO violations. Sterling Caldwell has cooperated fully with our investigation. Several city officials have been arrested for corruption. And I want to be clear about something. He paused, making sure every camera was focused on him. This investigation succeeded because ordinary citizens refused to be intimidated, because a community stood together, and because 1,200 bikers demonstrated that you can demand justice without resorting to violence. What happened in Ridgemont this week is how democracy is supposed to work. And I want to personally thank Margaret Brennan, who sacrificed her own safety to protect her son, and every member of the Hell Angels who showed us what brotherhood really means. The press conference ended, but the bikers didn't leave, not yet. 2 weeks after the shooting, Maggie was discharged from the hospital. The doctors wanted her to go to a rehab facility, but she refused. She wanted to go home, to her house, to her diner. Colt pushed her wheelchair through the hospital's front doors, and what waited outside took her breath away. 300 motorcycles lined both sides of the street. Their riders stood at attention, forming an honor guard. As Maggie emerged, they raised their right fists in silent salute. Hammer stepped forward, carrying something wrapped in leather. He knelt beside Maggie's wheelchair. "Mrs. Brennan, on behalf of every chapter represented here, I present you with this." He unfolded the leather to reveal a custom Hell Angels cut. The patches were immaculate, Ridgemont Rocker on the bottom, and across the back in beautiful embroidery the words Iron Mother with a Lionheart emblem beneath. "You're not an honorary member," Hammer said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're family, forever." Maggie touched the leather with trembling fingers. 40 years ago, when Colt had first told her he was joining a motorcycle club, she'd been terrified, convinced he was throwing his life away. Now, holding this cut, understanding what it represented, she finally got it. This wasn't a gang, it was a family, and she'd been adopted. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you. Thank you." The ride back to her house was slow and careful. Maggie on the back of Colt's bike with 300 escorts. When they arrived, she found her yard filled with flowers, cards, and gifts from people across the country who'd heard her story. Over the following months, Vincent Costello's trial became national news. Silas Monroe testified against him. Sterling Caldwell testified against him. A dozen other witnesses came forward, emboldened by what had happened in Ridgemont. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous on all 47 counts. Vincent Costello was sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Colt attended the sentencing sitting in the front row. When the judge read the verdict, Costello turned and looked directly at him. Colt held his gaze and smiled. 3 months after the shooting, Brennan's Route 66 diner reopened with a massive celebration. The Hell Angels had raised $250,000 for renovations, new kitchen equipment, expanded seating, and a memorial wall featuring photographs of Declan Colt and the 1,200 riders who'd stood with Maggie. The sign outside had been updated. It still read Brennan's Route 66 Diner, established 1984. But underneath, in smaller letters, Home of the Iron Mother, protected by brotherhood. Opening day drew 300 people, bikers, residents, tourists, media. Maggie worked the counter despite Colt's protest, her left arm still weak but functional. "I've been standing behind this counter for 40 years, she told him. "I'm not stopping now." By evening, she was exhausted but happy. After the last customer left, she sat in a booth with Colt, both of them drinking coffee and looking at the photographs on the memorial wall. "Your father would be proud," Maggie said quietly. "Of you, yeah, not sure about me. I nearly got you killed. You kept your promise to him. You protected me. You protected me, Ma. You took the bullet. And you brought 1,200 brothers to stand with us. That's protection, too." She reached across the table and took his hand. "We protected each other. That's what family does." 5 years later, Brennan's Diner had become a pilgrimage site. Bikers from across the country made it a point to stop there to meet the Iron Mother, to see where history had been made. Maggie was 73 now, her hair fully white, moving a little slower but still sharp as ever. She'd cut back her hours, hiring staff to help. But she was there most days, especially Sundays when the bikers came for breakfast. Colt was 47, with a wife now and a 3-year-old daughter named Declan Maggie Brennan. He'd stepped back from day-to-day club leadership, passing the president patch to sledgehammer, but he remained active. And every Sunday, he brought his family to breakfast at his mother's diner. This particular Sunday morning, his daughter climbed onto a stool at the counter and watched Maggie cook with wide eyes. "Grandma, Daddy says you're a hero," Maggie smiled. "Not a hero, sweetheart, just a mom. But you got shot." "Yes, and I'd do it again, because that's what mothers do. We protect our children, even when they're big and tough and think they don't need protecting anymore." She glanced at Colt, who was watching from a nearby booth. He smiled back, and in that smile was everything: love, gratitude, understanding. Every year on the anniversary of the shooting, 1,200 bikers returned to Ridgemont for what had become known as the Iron Mother Rally. It was part memorial, part celebration, and part fundraiser for wounded veterans and small business owners facing pressure from corrupt developers. This year, the 5th anniversary drew 2,500 riders from 30 states. The rally raised $500,000, and in Town Square they unveiled a bronze statue. It showed a woman pushing a man aside, her face determined, a bullet frozen in mid-flight. The plaque at the base read, "Margaret Iron Mother Brennan, who taught 1,000 sons the meaning of courage, March 2024. Maggie stood in front of the statue with tears streaming down her face. Colt stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "I don't deserve this," she said. "Yes, you do. You changed everything, Ma. Not just for us, for everyone who saw what you did. You showed people that ordinary folks can stand up to power. That family means something. That courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified." That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the sun was setting over the desert, Colt and Maggie stood in the parking lot of the Rusty Iron Tavern, the place where everything had changed. There was a plaque on the wall now marking the spot where Maggie had fallen. "Do you think about that night?" Colt asked. "Every day, but not with regret, with pride." "Why pride?" "Because I did what I was born to do. I protected my son. Your father would be proud of both of us." "Yeah," Colt hugged her gently, mindful of her shoulder even after 5 years. "I love you, Ma." "I love you too, baby, always." They stood together as the sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. In the distance, the sound of motorcycle engines rumbled like thunder, a reminder that the brotherhood was always there, always watching, always ready. Margaret Brennan had been a diner owner, a widow, an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. But when the moment came when her son's life hung in the balance, she'd moved without hesitation. And in doing so, she'd become something more. A symbol, a legend. The Iron Mother who'd taken a bullet and inspired 1,000 men to stand against injustice. The story of what happened in Ridgemont spread far beyond Arizona. It became the subject of books and documentaries. It changed how people viewed motorcycle clubs. And it reminded America that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry badges. Sometimes they wear aprons and serve coffee. Sometimes they're mothers who've spent 40 years taking care of others. And sometimes when evil comes calling, they step forward and take the bullet meant for someone else. Because that's what mothers do. That's what heroes do. And Margaret Brennan was both. The end.